the one thing the US has that keeps this insane war machine that Trump wants to spend $1.5 trillion a year on 800 bases around the world, the one thing propping all this up is the power of the dollar. And the power of the dollar is really premised on it being the global reserve currency. It still mostly is. And the petrodollar. And those two things, work side by side. If the petrodollar collapses, then chances are the reserve currency will be far behind. And so in order for the petrodollar to maintain, you need two things. You need the world to keep running on fossil fuels, and you need most of those fuels to be bought and sold in US dollars. They just hold up a sign and grimace for a few hours. There's a reason the police give permits to those, because that is acceptable in the imperial power structure. It's not threatening. There's a reason they've been planning for this for decades and never done it. And the reason is exactly what we're seeing, that Iran does have a powerful ability to impact the global oil markets and the global markets in general. And they knew this. People discussed this. Even the psychopath John Bolton has said, he hates Trump now, has said, I told Trump this would happen. I don't know what he was thinking.
All right. Well, I'll just start informally. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. This time we're with a guy that I'm a fan of, Lee Camp, a political comedian from the U.S. I've always been a huge fan of Bill Hicks since the early 2000s. So after I discovered him in I don't know, 2001, right when his material from the 1990s was newly relevant all over again, thanks to the Iraq War. I went out searching for political comedians that were anything like Hicks, and Lee was the first one that I found who is still alive, which is a very useful thing in a comedian. But that's my introduction. Would you want to just introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, that makes me proud that people were comparing me to him. He was gone before I got into comedy. I guess I started performing in 1998 at the age of 18, uh, and Bill Hicks was gone. George Carlin had a few more years, but I never did get to meet Carlin, although I became friends with his daughter, Kelly Carlin. But yeah, those are two of the titans of political stand-up comedy. For my introduction, I've been doing stand-up comedy for 25 years, but a lot of people know me as the writer and host of the comedy news show Redacted Tonight, which lasted 8 years, a weekly show, 300 some episodes. And then US sanctions shut down the RT network, and I kind of knew when I was doing that show that there'd never been that level of freedom on American airwaves, and there'd never been, at least in the weekly sense or regular sense, an anti-imperial, anti-capitalist comedy show on US airwaves. And so sure enough, it was shut down. My YouTube page was banned. My Spotify podcast was banned. My TikTok was banned. Simply being anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist will, if you gain enough traction, will get you can get you banned on these platforms.
Yeah, not surprising. Actually, thanks for reminding me of that. That's actually a perfect way to teach people a little bit about political economy of media and maybe correct some misimpressions that people have. Because so your show, Redacted Tonight, was on Russia Today, RT Network, starting what, like 2011, 2012?
Started 2014, and
Oh,
just for those who have no idea who I am not Russian. I'm American, born in
yeah.
America, covering American news. Uh, and they basically, RT just came to me and said, "Will you keep doing what you've been doing on YouTube, but create a show around it?" And I said yes, and I was never restricted or censored or anything. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of people, especially when Russia Gate started in 2016 or so,
yeah,
they did this kind of like vulgar political economy of media whereby they went, "Oh, RT is funded by Russia. Oh, okay, so it must all be Russian propaganda, everything on there." It's
yeah,
just not how it works. Like they had a news division, And in the straight news is basically where they would try to get like a narrative that's friendly to the Russian government
They actually,
into.
yeah, and they publicly said that RT News was the Russian view of the world. And
Yeah.
for a while, BBC had claimed, at least on their website, that they were the British view of the news around the world. And so RT was just like, we're doing what BBC is doing, except we're doing it for RT. But and you can complete the statement. RT News is different than these other shows. Yeah,
Yeah. And the other shows, it seemed like what they did was like in some cases, like in your show, I think the idea was, okay, let's get some critics of the US from the US talking about US politics and criticizing US political malfunctioning for the betterment of the US. But we will put them in there because there is no place on in the world of television or really like mass audiences on the internet where you can get a critical perspective on the US. So for them, it's like, okay, whatever, side benefit. But they also hired that guy from CNN, Larry
Larry King.
King, and he's not a critic of the U.S.
No,
establishment. So I
no,
guess
he,
like
he
they,
he's essentially the U.S. establishment. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
he, he did
exactly.
he did fawning interviews for everyone from Kissinger to probably all the presidents. Like, so,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So basically, my point to people to teach them a little bit about political economy of media is it's not like all of these channels have this like fully planned out propaganda design in every single second of content. You're overthinking this far too much. And in the particular case of RT, they were trying to get the Russian government's perspective in the news segments. And
mhm.
then in the all of the rest of the segments, it's either let's get viewers, let's collect eyeballs, so let's get
Yep.
that good content, or let's provide a critical view of US politics. And the shameful element there is not on anyone's shoulders other than the media barons in the US who have had complete control of the US media system and never presented a actual critical perspective on US politics. They shut it out. So the fact
Yeah.
that it was only a Russian channel that would seek out people with a critical perspective is just adding shame onto the backs of the people who have driven our media system into the off a cliff. I mean,
and
that's
and
yeah.
also very telling. Although I was not hugely famous before getting on RT, uh, several of the others that they gave shows to at RT, gave opinion shows to, and let them essentially do what they want, were those
Mhm.
who had been banished, who had started on mainstream media and been banished from mainstream media. People like Chris Hedges, who he and
Yep.
he and I, Pulitzer Prize winner with the New York Times, but when he came out against the Iraq War, they essentially forced him out. And he's been persona non grata on mainstream corporate airwaves ever since, but has said many other things that would get you banished from those networks. And he and I actually have been on multiple platforms where we were either kicked out or the platform dissolved, basically to shut our voices up, including Truth Dig was a well known one, but so Hedges, ends up on RT because the only network that would have him really after being forced out by the New York Times. Jesse Ventura, who, although
Oh, right.
the professional wrestler, but he was hated by the mainstream because he won governor of Minnesota in a third party simply because he got on the debate stage and people couldn't believe that someone outside of Democrat and Republican were allowed to speak and say something. But he then was going to be given an MSNBC show. It actually never aired. They had spent millions of dollars they were going to make him their tentpole guy in like 2001 or 2002. And then they're going into Iraq and they find out or know that Jesse Ventura is anti-Iraq war. And
Hmm.
they ultimately paid him. He wouldn't say the number, but he said double digits, millions of dollars to get out of his contract, just to go away, because the idea of MSNBC having their tentpole person be anti-war was catastrophic to them.
Right. That's our left wing broadcast network or cable network, technically. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
amazing, amazing. Yeah, I my only complaint about RT is that it didn't give you guys on Redacted Tonight as many writers as The Daily Show because my theory is that well, I forget, you probably know there's some comedian who said that comedy is 80% truth, 20% surprise. And if you take that formula and you put it into political comedy, you have to be like, Bill Hicks called himself Noam Chomsky with dick jokes. Like, you
Yeah,
have to be very well informed about politics so you can get that 80% truth part. And then
mm,
the super difficult part is putting in that 20% surprise. So you have to tell a joke that people have the knowledge to make it funny, but you also
yeah.
have to make it funny by bringing in that element of surprise, which is really goddamn hard. I don't know how you do it like in
Uh,
comedy shows, because
Thank you.
the thing from Hicks that like really sticks with me is, he tries to do his political comedy in the US. He only became really famous when he went to Canada and the UK and Australia.
Yeah,
But in the
UK
US,
biggest.
nobody knows shit about politics. So he says he would go to comedy shows and it was like showing a card trick to a dog.
Yeah, I dealt with some of that, and famously in one of his albums that was taped in front of a U.S. audience, or one of I don't know, it was an album or what? Yeah, I guess it was an album. But you can hear the audience petering out. They're slow. He's slowly losing them with some sort of politics, and then he eventually says, and I know this was a common line of his. He says, "Don't worry, the dick jokes are coming." Like we'll get to the dick jokes, and he had a whole bit about we'll float down to the end of this show on a throbbing dick parachute or something like that. Uh, and yeah, I definitely dealt with that stuff. But thank you for the compliment on the writing. Unlike these other shows, and some people know this, most do not, but the Daily Show, uh, they obviously are daily, but they have a staff of 150, including producers and things like that. Uh,
Whoa.
John Oliver, I know because a friend was on his writing staff when he started. I don't know what it is now, but in his first few years on HBO, uh, he had a just writing staff of a dozen people. So a dozen
Mm.
people are writing his, 25-minute show a week. And I had the same amount of time a week, but zero writers. So I wrote all of my own stuff, and that is it's unheard of. It's non-existent on mainstream television, and yeah, it was definitely an effort, but also something I'm quite proud of. It also helps make it easier to keep the voice and the opinions, the same. No one's telling me what to say. No one's like, I'm not. I just, if I were to get blacked out one week, or have a writing block, I can't just go off the opinions of someone else. So
Yeah.
it all was my beliefs and my opinions.
And amazingly, you found a bunch of comics in DC who seem to share the same basic view of the world back in the Redacted Tonight days. I don't know how you managed that. I grew up. Well, actually, you're from Virginia too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew
Yeah.
up like now it would be like 2 hours drive from DC. Never liked that city.
What town in Virginia?
Woodville.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
grew
you'd
up.
never have heard of it.
Yeah, mainly in Richmond.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
well, I will say, I think only one of them actually came from DC, Natalie McGill. The others all came from New York City, which is where I was for 12 years before getting the
Mm,
TV show. But the mainstays were John F. O'Donnell and Naomi Caravani, great
hmm
comedians. Um, you know, some of them, like, they were some of the correspondents we had were political enough to be on the show, but they weren't. It wasn't like their heart like it is for me. Like it's
mm,
like after they left the show, I think their comedy has gone back to being a little political, but
mm,
and it's wonderful comedy. I'm not insulted. Like, I like comedians who are not. There are comedians who are not political that I like.
hmm
But yeah, you're right that it is not easy to find. I'm amazed there aren't at least a few more. I'm not saying that I am not surprised at all that most comedians avoid this path, because you both alienate a fraction of the audience. You alienate the corporations that can give you gigs immensely. And so I am not shocked there aren't many, but I'm amazed that it's like near zero or something that are willing to be like leftist, you can kind of say revolutionary comedians.
Yeah. Well, it's my favorite genre of comedy, so I salute you and hopefully other people can pick up the torch and keep it alive. I have a question. I know you're not in the U.S. right now, but you do still live in the U.S. most of the time, right?
Yes, yeah, Baltimore. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I'm really curious. So watching from abroad, it seemed like there was a huge amount of organizing, protest activity, especially on college campuses at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza. But then it seemed like these universities with the state really cracked down on campus protests and basically, through all sorts of means, tried to strangle them out. So is that an accurate understanding of what's been going on in terms of the protest scene? Because, Kareem just reminded me of this, that you had that Israel Day parade in New York like last month or so, and you had who is it, Smotrich or Ben Gvir, maybe both, one of them certainly was there at the parade. But as far as I could tell from the coverage, there wasn't really that much of like a counter protest or really any major protest against this
Uh,
genocide there in a very public role in the New York City Israel Day parade. So I'm just wondering what is going on with the state of anti-war organizing in the U.S., if you can answer that super broad question.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the decrease in protests, I think you're seeing two things. One is you're absolutely right that they basically different cities, different schools strategized over time of how to stop these encampments, how to stop these protests. It's similar to I was part of the first days of Occupy, and it's similar to what they did with Occupy. They at first they didn't have a clear way to stop the energy, to stop people from the movement from growing. And then slowly, city by city, they go, oh, this works. Oh, well, it turns out if you kick them out of the area they're in and tell them you need to clean it, and then all of their resources and things are torn up and thrown in dumpsters, yeah, some will come back, but it'll probably be fewer. And you do that a few times and it becomes too difficult. Like they
Mm,
literally had conference calls, mayors at various cities being like, here's how you destroy the lives of these protesters.
hmm
So I think there's a lot of that similarity of like sharing of tactics. They certainly, some of it has gotten large scale coverage. Certainly went after some of the strongest voices in these protests at Columbia and other schools, to arrest them, to, if they were there on a visa, to revoke their visa. They started going after people that just wrote a column in the school newspaper about
hmm
genocide. So yeah, using all those tactics, and that's not going to stop everyone. But the truth is, you can get it down to a minimal number where it's not having the impact it was. And um, but I think bigger even than that, if you're talking about a month ago, it's just that coverage of Gaza in mainstream or in independent media has just fallen off a cliff. I mean, I do live streams weekly on YouTube and Substack, and I still cover it, but people get even people that care get exhausted, and it's tough to bring them new information. After 3 years of
mm
genocide, you go, well, another 100 children were killed, and even the people that gave a shit initially start rolling their eyes, going, "Yeah, what else is new?" And that is really tough to keep people concerned, to keep them caring. I know from people in Gaza that they say the donations to make surviving possible have also fallen off a cliff. So yeah, it is really tough.
Oof. What about just broader anti-war organizing? Because, I could understand where a lot of like left-wing activists' attention would be focused more on the war on Iran, although it's all, part of a related piece. But is there a lot, at least as far as you've been able to tell, a lot of organizing to try to stop the war?
Uh, you mean Gaza? Or you mean Iran?
Iran,
Or both? Yeah, I
or
mean,
both, yeah, and
there,
Lebanon.
there, there were definitely protests. You know, I am over these years and going to God knows how many protests and speaking at many of them. I've become rather disenchanted with most of the protests unless they're combined with organizing, combined with interrupting business as usual, combined with
Hmm
other more important activism activities. then they kind of serve as just a parade. They serve as like a release
Hmm.
valve. And so I think you saw plenty of those kind of release valve parades where people hold up signs. And it's not that I think those shouldn't happen, because you can first of all, you can turn new people on to the issue. You can use them as a stepping stone to organizing. Hey, we're all here. Let's talk about next steps. So there are ways that can be used. But if that was the beginning and end of the activism, if it was show up on this day for 3 hours, hold up a sign, and look angry, and then go home, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see that creating any change. I don't, there could be a million people outside the White House. I don't think Trump gives a shit. So it's like, what change does it actually create? Now, we've seen other types of activism, BDS, et cetera, cause actual change, cause schools to divest from Israel. Like, those type of things have impacts, lasting impacts, I think. But yeah, the just hold up a sign and grimace for a few hours. There's a reason the police give permits to those, because that is acceptable in the imperial power structure. It's not
Yeah.
it's not threatening.
Yeah. One tiny point of slight disagreement would just be, I
Mm,
think Trump is one of the few presidents who would care more than the average if there was actually a million people surrounding the White House. There's that story, I don't know if it's true or not, of Richard Nixon talking to Kissinger and basically like saying something like, "Oh shit, look at all these people outside the White House. Like, if this keeps up, we're going to be the pitchforks are going to come in and kill us." I forget what the actual line was, but there was some story like that. I would imagine Trump, given his psychology, is probably a little more sensitive to truly massive protests right around the White House. But on the broader question, I couldn't agree more. Um, I mean, I would go even maybe a little bit further than that. Like, most recently, I've been kind of rethinking the way that I thought about politics in my young adult years,
mm,
where the most important thing was, yes, you go to protest, but you have to understand reality. You have to understand the truth. You have to grasp it. And that process of talking with people at a cafe and reading and that's so that was the most important thing. And you argue with people over what the truth is. And now I look at it and I say, actually, no, it's all about organizing. You have to join a fucking organization, follow orders, get out there and work as one. If you're just an individual, it's not going to do anything. But yeah, like
yeah.
you said, protest if they're interrupting things. Now we're talking something a little different. Because if it's just
Mhm.
expressive, it makes me think of Arundhati Roy. She wrote an essay about the Naxalites, the Maoist movement in India. She said
Mm,
something like, if nobody's paying attention, what the fuck is a hunger strike going to do? If you just die from hunger, but there's no attention to it, what does that
right.
accomplish? The
Right.
whole idea of this nonviolent civil disobedience is that you get media attention, and the media attention changes public opinion, which puts pressure on the government. If you are
Yeah.
missing that key step, then the whole thing, the logic of it falls apart.
Yeah,
Um,
like the discussion about the I think perfectly justifiable debate or discussion about the Gaza flotillas. Uh,
mm,
some activists find them to be very powerful. Others say you're taking the spotlight away from Gazans and putting it on Westerners that are on
mm,
boats. And I lean towards thinking it is important, because
mm,
these are the few times recently that the mainstream media has actually talked about Gaza. Like, it's fallen off the newspapers pages, except
mm,
when activists in these flotillas are being abused or imprisoned. Now, that being said, I don't wish for anybody to sign up to be tortured, but it does seem to have the impact you're talking about, which is
mm,
mainstream coverage, mainstream discussion. I think a lot of people were shocked that Israel was willing to torture even Westerners,
mm,
even Greta Thunberg and others. I think that a lot that got a lot of people's attention. Is like, oh, Israel, it really is a horrific state.
mm. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that people who are saying that it's counterproductive because it takes attention off of Gaza is just they don't understand the way media works. But Yeah, I'm also a little questioning whether that is the best strategy. Although just because it isn't the best doesn't mean
Yeah,
it's has negative value.
yeah,
Um, so now we're in the middle of this. Like I was talking to a friend of mine, it seems like there's liminal space in between. Like you have the immovable object of just economic reality, and then you have the irresistible force of the Israel lobby and the neocons in the US, whom I would never bet against, except we have this, immovable force of the global economy and the reality that if you keep up this war, Iran, because of its geographical position, can put a hell of a lot of pressure on that system. So I mean, literally, my money is still on the Israel lobby and the neocons winning. But what is your sense of the state of play? Because we've seen over the past week if not unprecedented, it's taken a hell of a long time to find a precedent of an administration publicly putting a kind of rhetorical, at least, distance between themselves and the Israeli government.
yeah,
That's been quite surprising to me. I mean, granted, it is all just words. There are some actions, like the lifting of restrictions on some of that Iranian money, the ending of the naval blockade. So it's not just words, but the actions are not that big, and the rubber will really meet the road when we see the U.S. cutting Israel off of essential weaponry, and we have not seen that. So it could all just be words. But how are you looking at this now? And do you get a sense for how leftists in the U.S. are trying to make sense of this?
yeah. I mean, there's a reason that the U.S. has been planning for regime change or war against Iran for decades. They were on Wesley Clark's list of 7 countries in 5 years. Obviously, it took longer than that, but the U.S. has gone after and nearly crushed every one of those countries. Iran's the only one left,
Hmm.
but there's a reason they've been planning for this for decades and never done it. And the reason is exactly what we're seeing, that Iran does have a powerful ability to impact the global oil markets and the global markets in general. And they knew this. People discussed this. Even the psychopath John Bolton has, he hates Trump now, has said, I told Trump this would happen. I don't know what he was thinking. Uh, but yeah, Iran has a lot of power in this scenario, and it doesn't mean they're not suffering. They're absolutely suffering, but it doesn't seem that the U.S. as a collapsing empire has any way out of this other than to go against Israel. Israel will keep trying to bring back, or restart this war with Iran in one way or another. I'm sure that even if we see so-called peace hold out for a while, there's no doubt that Israel is going to do plenty of things, maybe bombings, but going back to assassinating scientists, assassinating various Iranian officials, etc. Um, but Israel is also behind the gun, except that they think that the end times will, if they can bring about some sort of battle, Armageddon battle, that they can create greater Israel. But Israel's not doing well either. I mean, their economy really only sustains because the U.S. continues to prop it up. Their weaponry only sustains because of the U.S. They've proven that this Iron Dome is kind of a cotton candy dome, and they're using billions of dollars of weaponry to try to stop $30,000 Iranian drones. So they don't really have an ability to do full battle against Iran, and to me it shows the desperation. Like, I don't know how it will end. Yes, the U.S. could continue to drop bombs on little girls in Iran. That absolutely could restart, and it's horrific. But I don't see the U.S. winning this. I think this is the waning
Hmm.
days of an empire. People have said it's really kind of closely analogous to the British fight with Egypt and Nasser in the Suez Canal, where despite completely destroying Nasser's
Hmm.
military, Nasser proved that he could just scuttle some ships across the canal, and all of a sudden the British Empire, which was already on the way out, fell to its knees and had to take a loan from the IMF just to stay afloat. Uh, this is seeming very similar, and those were kind of, people point to that as kind of the last days of the British Empire. This very well could be the last days of the U.S. Empire.
Inshallah, from your lips to God's ears. I've also heard, I don't know this history very well, but I've heard that in the waning days of apartheid South Africa, the ruling class there was as crackpot as you could imagine, thinking that their path towards salvation it lay in invading a whole bunch of neighboring countries again. So they had plenty of new war plans up until the collapse of apartheid. So, maybe like them, like the British Empire, this is like the dying throes of a mad empire. Um,
And And
yeah, go
and just
ahead.
if I can get to kind of the even larger picture for a moment, the reason Iran is this pivotal piece on the chessboard is because the U.S. knows that their main competitor is China. China is not just advancing beyond the U.S. economically, but in the telltale markers of technological advancements. I think there's like what it's like 90 different markers, and China leads in like 85 of them. I might be off by a few, but that's close. It's the US is not even competing with China in so many ways any longer. And the one thing the US has that keeps this insane war machine that Trump wants to spend $1.5 trillion a year on 800 bases around the world, the one thing propping all this up is the power of the dollar. And the power of the dollar is really premised on it being the global reserve currency. It still mostly is. And the petrodollar. And those two things, work side by side. If the petrodollar collapses, then chances are the reserve currency will be far behind. And so in order for the petrodollar to maintain, you need two things. You need the world to keep running on fossil fuels, and you need most of those fuels to be bought and sold in US dollars. And those two things continue, but we're seeing shifts away from both. Countries are increasingly realizing that they need to shift away from selling and buying oil in dollars because it makes them indebted to the U.S. and it
Hmm.
makes the U.S. very powerful. And on top of that, the world, despite the greatest efforts of the U.S. and Britain and others, is switching off of fossil fuels. And one of the best things China has done for their own security is that they have massive oil reserves, but then they're also putting in 5 nuclear power plants worth of green energy per week. Now, the way green energy works, it's not all 100% output. So it's really amounts to about
Hmm.
one nuclear power plant output of green energy per week, which is still unbelievable. And
Hmm.
all that green energy, as it continues to grow, will mean less and less fossil fuels. You have more electric cars, etc. The U.S. despises all of this because it means the petrodollar is on the way out. And Iran is, one of these linchpins, as is Venezuela, with the largest oil reserves in the world. The U.S. The overall plan is for the U.S. to cut off China from all oil and cut off Russia. They've succeeded at cutting off Russian oil from Europe for the most part. They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and they've also via Ukraine hit all of these other Russian oil refineries. So these all work together on the chessboard of cutting China off from energy. But so far, it's seeming like a desperate Hail Mary for a waning empire.
Yeah, and another important thing about the petrodollar is what happens. The reason why it's a thing and why it's essential is that those dollars that go from the US to the petroleum exporting countries of the mostly West Asia, they turn around and instead of just selling them in FX markets, which would cause the value of the dollar versus other currencies to collapse, making the empire too expensive to afford, instead they just take those dollars and buy US debt or they buy US weaponry. Now, those two things are not, that we haven't seen any major announcement about cutting off those legs of the petrodollar. But, all the ingredients are certainly there. We've just seen that all the amazing U.S. weaponry on U.S. bases that are supposed to be there for protection did the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do and ended
Mhm.
up being a magnet for bullets or for missiles and drones.
Yeah.
Um, and so, if this is all dependent on the ruling class of the states in the region, and I wouldn't put very much faith in them, but you never know. I mean, the structural pressures are there for them to wake up and extract themselves from this aspect of the U.S. imperial system. And if that happens, then we're talking about really like the empire's foundation weakening. So, that
Yeah,
could
which
become.
is why they're trying to cut away pieces of bricks. They just see which ones
Mm.
they can peel away.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's another huge story. Like, I think a lot of people, at least from what I've heard from Kareem, who knows YouTube a lot better than I do, there's a lot of people with like really unrealistic hopes for bricks. Like they just came into
Mm,
politics recently, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is like the Avengers or like the whatever the DC Comics version of that is, the Justice League, and they're gonna fix the situation and end Empire." It's like, no, there's massive problems throughout the BRICS, and I wrote a couple of essays about that. But
yeah.
even China, which is by far the least hopeless major country in the world. So I'm choosing my words very carefully. By
Yeah.
far the least hopeless, still has lots and lots of problems to try to overcome. It's
Hmm.
just I think it's just objectively the least hopeless country because think about how we would have looked at China in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. Like, the argument that it was going to be in India forever. It was just going to do low value added manufacturing. Most people would be poor. There'd be a small capitalist class that would be super rich. But, it'd never pose any threat to the US because it would just be
Yeah.
stuck at the bottom of value chains. And plus, it's going to be, spewing carbon and its cities were super polluted, etc. Meanwhile, in the 2000s, people that, I was listening to, the hopeful ones were saying, hey, 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 wait and see, wait and see. Who knows? China still might be playing this game of doing technology transfer, absorbing foreign technology the only way they can, which is through FDI, and then investing massively in renewable energy. And now we're in the position we're in right now, which, as you noted, China is by far the global leader in renewable tech, and we're going to need them to redouble, retriple their efforts on that, and more importantly, export it all over the world so that more of the
Yeah.
world is using this.
Yeah. Very true.
Sorry, I feel like I was just preaching for a while there.
No, I like it. I have plenty to learn from you. So.
Well, it's like comedy except not funny. And so the thing I wanted to ask you though was, I feel like ever since I've moved out of the US, I feel more and more disconnected from what's going on there, and I worry that I'm either getting too pessimistic or too optimistic. And the
Mm,
reason I have for pessimism, I think, is obvious. I don't even have to
yeah.
go into that.
Yeah.
But for optimism, like it, ever since, again, going back to the 2000s, my hope was that the internet would provide an ecosystem of information that would give people at least the opportunity to learn things there was no chance in hell they would have ever learned in the old
Mhm.
information ecosystem, like the
Yeah.
1980s cable, broadcast TV, newspapers. Sure, you could read like left-wing analysis if you went to like a university town and went to their library. It's just now anyway. So I was hopeful about the power of the internet to give people information that they really needed to get an accurate sense of the world. And I think we've seen that to some extent. I mean, if you look at the public opinion polls, the massive gap between young and old on Palestine.
Can we
What do you
can we
think?
go can we go on a little tangent here?
Yeah, yeah,
I want
please.
no, as far as I know, no one's written this piece, but maybe you
Hmm.
could do it for us. Uh, I think there was a golden window of apps of actually largely free internet information. Information was organic and it was running wild, and that
Hmm.
window went from these are shades of gray, but went from like 2008, 2010, something like that, through to where Bernie Sanders nearly won the presidency and
Mm.
the ruling elite were horrified. They got horrified a little earlier than that because guess what? During that window, and it's not that the internet started in 2008, but it needed to get fast enough and needed to be like available on everyone's phones, and so that you literally had everybody getting information almost instantaneously as it's happening. You know, a cop kills a child and it's everywhere in hours. Uh,
Hmm.
and so that didn't happen until, maybe 2008 or something. And during that time, you had Occupy, you had Arab Spring, you had Black Lives Matter, you had the Standing Rock, yeah, and I'm just
Hmm.
mainly the U.S. ones, but Yellow Vests. You
Hmm.
had all these massive, kind of impressive, uh, revolutionary, at least in intent, protests
Hmm.
popping off, and and you had politicians' careers ruined over things that were revealed, etc. And then they kind of shut it down. Like 2016 was when I was first shadow banned in on Facebook, which was my largest platform
Hmm.
at the time, and they capped me without saying anything. I wasn't told you violated any rule. They just made it
Hmm.
impossible for me to get a message out. I went from gaining 5,000 followers a week to gaining no one. Uh, and it's the same on the other platforms. Some of them I got banned on, but they really shut it all down. Then they sanctioned, RT into oblivion. They really put the bars on
Yeah.
free flow of information starting in 2016. And I feel like there's an interesting article or maybe even a book about what happened between like 2008 and 2016 that the ruling elite needed to stop.
Mm. Yeah, that I wish there was a book that I know of because I would love to read it. Like to go behind the scenes a bit. There's
Yeah.
a book I'm not going to be able to spot it, but there's a I think it was called Shadow Rulers or something. It's I'm also blanking on the author's name, but this is someone who is involved in like NGO efforts to censor the internet in the 2010s. But it's a very interesting perspective. Her thing was like we should institute freedom of speech, not freedom of reach on the internet. So you don't have freedom of reach. You can say whatever you like, but that doesn't mean that social media companies have to like give you wide reach.
which
So
is
I
which is
think
what's happened to me. Like I can
exactly.
keep saying what I say. No one's gonna notice it.
Exactly. And the funny thing to me is like that's really cute, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. But it reminded me exactly of a critique that a legal scholar, Stanley Ingber, made decades ago, which was I think it was him. His point was something like, what use is freedom of speech as a constitutionally protected right if it only allows you to just like stand on a soapbox in a park? Meanwhile, the actual means of mass communication, television, radio, newspapers, are completely blocked to you. Or
Hmm.
like AJ Liebling said, like a century ago, the the Constitution guarantees freedom of the press to all who own one. And to
Yes.
those who don't own a press, you don't get it. So
Yes.
that's I think exactly what happened. And the book I'm thinking of was like it was talking about the 2010s, but I think you're right. I think the realization, the shock and the fear happened around the Sanders campaign. And it was probably around that time that companies first started doing this. And it was only under Biden that more attention, because you had what the Twitter files. So people on the right
Yeah.
who had this happen to them to some extent, there was shit tons of attention from them. But I think you're right. I think it probably happened, somewhere between Occupy and Sanders.
Yeah, and the former CEO of YouTube in one interview, this is during Russiagate, she proudly said, "We've decreased viewing of extremist content by 70%." And you think, "Oh, that's wonderful if that means the ones telling kids to go become Nazis." But what does a CEO of YouTube consider extremist content? Well, me criticizing capitalism, criticizing US
Yeah.
wars, uh, criticizing Israel's genocide. I am extremist content. So yeah, it's designed to be a catch-all.
Yeah, and that's the form of censorship we have now. I actually wrote a book about this because to me this is the most fascinating topic in the world. What was the Herman and Chomsky book? Manufacturing Consent made a big impression on me. It really helped to explain how the U.S. media system worked. But
Yeah.
what I found interesting is that all so much of the criticism of it was like, oh my God, this is like a conspiracy theory, like so unrealistic. And it's just like, well, no. First of all, both authors are really fucking explicit that this was not a conspiracy theory, it's a structural analysis of the structural pressures operating on the media. But I think what happened when people read it is they couldn't imagine the psychology, the thinking of the journalist actually working in the media system. And so they couldn't imagine how structural pressures work other than as a conspiracy theory. So the book I wrote was all about trying to bring in the psychology of the situation so that you could understand how you have this whole army of journalists working in a de facto propaganda system who nonetheless think that they're perfectly free. There's a great expression I
Yeah.
learned
And
in. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, and one of the biggest thing is self-censorship because they have come up in that system. Like you don't find yourself, with very few exceptions, you don't find yourself in the New York Times newsroom unless you've been saying things acceptable to the New York Times for for your entire academic upbringing. Like if
Right.
you were revolutionary, anti-capitalist, whatever, you're never getting that call.
What? You never got a call from the New York Times?
No, for
I'm
some odd reason,
shocked.
they did do a front page of the arts section attack piece on me that was filled with
Oh, I
falsehoods.
remember.
Yeah,
You're a Russian puppet, right?
Russian puppet, but it was just hilarious how they couldn't even get simple facts right. They found some whistleblower at RT to say that I was being told what to say and everything, and she said she was there when my show started. In fact, she was there for 2 months before my show ever started. And like it's like simple facts like that. New York Times couldn't bring themselves to figure out.
I'm sorry to say I'm not shocked at all, or not even mildly surprised at all. But no, but about the whole U.S. media system, a student of mine came up with the perfect line. He was like, "Oh, I get it. The U.S. media system just has censorship with American characteristics." Boom.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect. That basically sums it all up. But
yeah.
I want to kind of end on a more hopeful note, if possible. And I always now I'm trying to think of like how to get people who might be only recently interested in politics, who might be watching this, who don't have, decades of experience, et cetera, blah, 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 to give them some ideas about organizations they can join so that they can be part of a whole that's bigger than the sum of the parts.
Mm.
So in the US at least, but also if you know of organizations in Europe or anywhere really, where would you recommend somebody who's getting into politics? They're learning about it now. They're using YouTube. They're listening to us now to kind of get their bearings. How do you to make that next step to join an organization where you can actually be something, be part of something bigger than yourself?
Well, I both love that question, and I'm probably not the person to ask because I do view us all as having our our space, our the things we can add to revolutionary change. And I've known for a long time that mine is media. I exhaust myself putting out. I put out. It's usually 2 to 3 columns a week. It's 3 live streams a week. I had the other show on Redacted Tonight for a year, and then doing interviews. So the amount of time I have to go to meetings and be part of other actions is rather small.
Hmm.
My partner Eleanor Goldfield does more organizing, and people can look her up. She works with Project Censored, which also deals with all of the
Mm.
issues we've been discussing. But I will say that I have worked with mutual aid in the United States. I think that's a great one. There's mutual aid chapters around the U.S. and they're both a good way to think politically, but also in terms of community and in terms of just helping others. That so some of the time I was most active with them was during COVID lockdown when literally people couldn't even get groceries, and there were immigrants that were afraid to leave their house, and We were involved in bringing people groceries just so their kids could eat, and like those type of things. You feel it's like you're politically active, but you're also making an impact in an individual's life at the same time. So yeah, I do love mutual aid. And then there's it depends on what the specific area is that the person finds most important. Now, I do think that we should probably be focusing on multiple issues at once. But at the same time, I know there are people who are really devoted to stopping, animal abuse, the animal agriculture. I call them torture farms,
Mm.
which is where most meat in the U.S. is made, and where and how. And so I know people are very active in stopping that. And it's like I think that needs to stop, and I also think genocide in Gaza needs to stop. So, so
Hmm.
uh, I do think you find your thing that really activates you, that you're passionate about, and look for those groups to be part of.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I would just add, always try to find opportunities for education, like educating other people, sharing what
Mhm.
you've learned. Because one thing in psychology that I think affects, well, it certainly affects all of us, the curse of knowledge. When we learn something new, our default state is just to assume that we learned what everyone else already knew. This is not the
Yeah,
reality
yeah,
at
yeah,
all.
yeah,
When you learn something new, other people don't fucking know that. So if you are in an organization, if you're doing, animal rights work or trying to end these torture factories, and your colleagues there, whatever you call it, co-activists there, aren't so up to speed on U.S. foreign policy and imperialism,
yeah,
do try to spread the word, try to spread that knowledge. And I would even say like whatever political party, like I know DSA isn't a political party, but DSA, PSL, even I would still advocate for trying to take over the Democratic Party, at least in various small elections first, before we attempt a hostile takeover of the whole party. But regardless, all I'm trying to say is there is no perfect political organization that I'm aware of in the US. It
yeah.
really falls upon us, people who are alive right now, to join organizations, maybe found new ones, whatever, whatever works, but to fix the ones that exist, or if you start a new one, to constantly improve it. So, like, I would just say,
Yeah,
don't, yeah.
like you said with the smaller Democratic Party or whatever party, I believe that voting is important, but I think it's mainly important in local, citywide. Those seem to be far less captured, sometimes statewide. But federally, it feels like the system is so aggressively captured that if people are spending a lot of time thinking about federal elections, then they're probably wasting their energy, wasting their ability to create change. The large Princeton study that found that the U.S. is an oligarchy, and that the American people, even when they want something to happen, like American people are united on wanting universal health care, it has essentially a 0% chance of happening unless it aligns with corporate interests. And, and so if that's the case, then fighting all day, every day to get one member of Congress who is slightly better on a couple of issues seems to be a waste of your energy and your life force.
And money and time.
And
Yeah, no,
money.
I
Yeah.
get that. I think the way to think about it is just like electoral politics is one aspect. And I think,
Yeah.
as weird as this sounds, I think we can learn a lot from the Hindu fascists in India, because the RSS was founded in like the 1920s. They modeled it after European fascist parties, and they didn't even try to contest elections for decades because they were smart and they realized we can't just up and create a political party and get people to vote us into national level office. What we need to do first is spread our ideology throughout society, or, in their terms, educate people to think that the way we do. I think
Mm.
sadly the state of the left in the US is such that the most important task is really to basically do what the Hindu fascists were doing in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, which is trying to educate people, spread this way of thinking, this understanding, and then the national level politics will be a hell of a lot easier, kind of fall into place.
Similarly, I've felt that if a party was going to create change, a newer party or an independent party, something that's small right now, like the Green Party, and I've done events for them. I've done speeches with Jill Stein and Jamu Baraka and others, but for them to actually have any impact, I think that whatever party needs to be prevalent in the community. It needs to be going throughout states and acting like mutual aid acts. I realize that some of this stuff takes money, so that can be a problem. But some of it doesn't take much money, and it's going throughout communities, helping people. So like if you're educating communities on how to deal with ICE agents, like uh, those type of things don't cost a lot of money. It's usually just human hours, human time. Uh,
Hmm.
but I've often thought like, back when the main news story was Flint, Michigan has no clean water. It's like, why aren't there groups, parties going and saying we'll bring water to Flint, Michigan, and doing their best. I get that they can't fund it forever, but it just feels like then your name or your effort, your brand, for lack of a better term, becomes helping communities and helping people and creating change.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I, I just one little point here that I forget who said. I think it might have been Catherine Liu called charity efforts. I forget how she would put it, whatever, but like efforts to help people feed the hungry, provide assistance to the homeless, etc. It is a neoliberal band-aid in the sense that neoliberalism is trying to shrink the capacity of the state to simply upholding and sustaining markets, and then everything else is supposed to just be offloaded onto the private sector, civil society,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then that kind of helps neoliberalism. But what you're saying, I think, is not that. If it's
right.
just pure charity, then it can function as a neoliberal band-aid. But if it's part of a broader political project, it's not just you're not in effect helping the neoliberal state cohere because you're providing the essential services that it refuses to provide. You're using that as an opening to educate people so that after being educated, they can join an organization to take state power and use it the way it should be used, which is to
Yeah.
provide for human needs.
And I think that's a great point. I think that's why mutual aid, one of the slogans is solidarity, not charity. Like they're not
Love.
call yeah, they're not calling it charity because that's just giving away things. And then the other aspect of what you're talking about is it would just be a step too cynical for my liking to be like, well, if people, if poor kids were able to eat, then there's less likely to be revolutionary change. So I'm not going to help them eat because, you know,
Yeah, that's a step too cynical for me as well. Yeah. But I've kept you for an hour, so I want to thank you very much for being generous with your time. I know you're traveling, you're probably jet lagged as well. But before we go, is there any first of all, can you tell people where to find your
yeah.
material, both comedy and political commentary?
Yeah, actually, this worked out perfectly. I just put out a new stand-up comedy half hour. I put out, half hours more regularly, and this is my second one in 6 months, called Nationalism is a Brain Parasite. And it's available on my Substack if people join up at reallycamp.substack.com. But almost all of my other content outside of my stand-up comedy is not members only, not behind a paywall. So loads and loads of free content, including 3 live stream a week. I have 3 podcasts, one called Government Secrets, one called The Lee Camp Show. All of that is at reallycamp.substack.com or at leecamp.com is my main website. So if people want to just remember those 7 letters, leecamp.com, and check out all my stuff. But yeah, podcasts, live streams, all of it.
Damn, I've been a fan of yours for a long time now, and I didn't even know about this. So I'm glad to find out. So it's
I will
it's
I will make sure to
Substack.
send you the link after we get done here.
Oh no, I found it because as you were talking, I was searching. So it's substack.com/@reallycamp. and then
Yeah.
that's the okay.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm just curious. This is just a point that probably only I am curious about and nobody else in the world is. But it seems to me like stand-up comedy has changed in so much because of woke. No, just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of the internet. Because like back when Bill Hicks was doing his thing, he could work on his set for God knows how long and it would stay fresh because nobody would hear you go from city to city, nobody heard
Yep.
about it. Now it's on YouTube, so it seems like especially political comedians have an even tougher time because you have to constantly come up with new material more frequently. Is that true? Is that how it's working?
Well, that's also why you see stand-up comedy trying to adjust in multiple ways. One is a lot of clubs are locking cell phones in bags when you perform so that people can't
Ah,
film you. When I was, I left New York City. I'd spent 12 years performing every night of the week, every comedy club in New York City. So I was on stage with all of the people everyone's heard about, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Seinfeld. They all would show up and do sets. But they had a tough time. Like I remember one set with Chris Rock. He seemed really frazzled by the fact that so many people had phones out and he couldn't get them to put them down. He would try and ask them to, and they
mm,
wouldn't do it. And so yeah, it can become a problem for especially the more famous ones. The other thing stand-up comics are doing, which is really shitty and hack, is they can't create enough new content, so they're just putting out crowd work clips, which means everyone's doing crowd work, and crowd work can be a little enjoyable for the audience in the moment. But when I was coming up, I never did much of it because I always viewed it as hack. And
agreed.
and for the when you're on stage with the same comedians every night, some of them I was on stage with every night, and they're doing crowd work. People don't realize most of the crowd work has been said a million times. Like there's very little, some of that. There's a tiny fraction that were great improv artists that could riff every time. But most crowd work has been said 40 times before because they have dealt with every type of person. They've spoken to
Hmm.
everyone. They know that when they ask the man next to his wife how long they've been married, the man will pause and then they'll make fun of them for not knowing how long they've been married. It's a
Right.
magic trick that is overdone. But I will say this, that I am a kind of rarity because, as I mentioned before, I wrote a new show every week for 8 years. So I write a lot of new content, and that's why I'm trying to put out these new half hours. The thing that's stopping me is not new content. It's that with all of the suppression, I mean, I'm suppressed into oblivion on these platforms. It's very tough for me to
Mhm.
let fans know I'm coming to a city. Uh,
Right.
so therefore, I can't have like big shows. I can't just perform tons of times. So basically, what I've been doing is just going to New York and doing like one show every 6 months or 4 months or something, and hopefully getting a video of a new half hour. But
Mm.
that is not the way most comedians would do it. Most comedians, you're right, are touring with the same hour, sometimes for a year, to hone it and then putting it out.
Wow. Well, far more than that I could ever hope to do. I find writing even non-funny stuff can take me quite a while. So, hats off. Thank you so much for taking the time. Hope to talk to you again, and more so, hope to see another show of yours. If you're ever in Hong Kong, please somehow get the word out.
I will definitely reach out to you. Yeah, how long you been in Hong Kong?
Almost 9 years.
9 years. Okay. Yeah.
And I would have thought there's no audience here, but I was completely wrong. And in fact, I was just in Tianjin in the mainland, and there was a comedy club there that has both Chinese and English language comedy. So you might consider coming out to the civilized part of the world.
Yeah, I've been in China a bit recently, but not Hong Kong. But yeah,
Well, keep it in the back of your head.
will do. Thanks again. Really,
My
really enjoyed
pleasure. It was
talking to you, Peter.
great talking with you, Lee. Till next time. Keep up
Later.
the good work. Bye.
Bye. Thanks again.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. Bedbeat medium makes you feel No borders, no change, no silence.